probability of a U.S. recession to 35%. I want to bring in CNBC senior markets correspondent Dominic Chu. Dom, what's behind this decision and how are markets reacting?
So the decision right now is about some of the tariff uncertainty and what the ripple effects could be. That's the reason why economists across Wall Street, most notably this morning from Goldman Sachs, have raised those recession risks to just around 1 in 3 in terms of the probabilities. One of the things that we're paying attention to is just how much the markets have lost in terms of their value over the course of the last couple of months here, given the fact that we just saw record highs just a couple of months ago. At this point, we started off sharply lower again today. The Dow was off by about 435 points at one point. As you can see there on your screen, we're currently up about 110. That's how big of a swing it was. Some traders are attributing that reversal today just to this notion that markets have gone down so far so quickly that they can't go down in a straight line completely. It remains to be seen whether or not this is a bottom or not, but that's what's happening right now. Meanwhile, in certain parts, specifically in the marketplace, what we have seen are big technology stocks, media type companies like the Meta platforms of the world, like Amazon, like Apple, Microsoft, Nvidia, and others. The ones that have seen the biggest declines are some of the ones that are now starting to see a little bit of buying opportunities. One thing I will point out, though, the artificial intelligence trade has also been one of those key flashpoints in the market over the last couple of months. Companies like Nvidia, which had become at one point one of the most valuable companies in the world, have lost about a third of their value, those shares, just since hitting record highs back in the early part of January. Other companies in the AI universe, like Palantir, also seeing bigger declines as well. So as we start to see whether or not these tariffs hit sentiment, one of the things we'll look for is whether or not those technology stocks can find some kind of stability. And by the way, Chris, two other places you want to keep a close eye on, no matter what part of the world you're in. Gold prices continue to move higher on this idea that they could be a safe haven trade for geopolitical risk and everything else. The other thing to look at right now is people are buying U.S. government bonds. They only typically do that when they think that there are some kind of risks to be accounted for down the line. So watch those prices for gold and U.S. Treasury debt, Chris. That's what everyone on Wall Street's watching right now.
Dominic Chu, thank you. Now to the White House, where in an exclusive interview with NBC News, President Trump told Meet the Press moderator Kristen Welker he isn't ruling out running for president again. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is following this story. Okay, what more did he have to say?
Well, just take a moment, Chris, right, to note how extraordinary that statement is from an American president who knows that there is a 2-term limit to serve as president that is defined in the Constitution with the 22nd Amendment. The president, who does often like to talk about public reaction that he gets and advice and inquiries from others, has said that there are many people who want him to do this and that he believes it's a reflection of his performance so far, a couple of months into his second non-consecutive term. Here is what the president said when reporters asked on Air Force One, following up on Kristen's original conversation with the president over the weekend. Here's how he addressed the issue of a possible third term.
You were not joking about a third term, about possibly wanting a third term. Does that mean you're not planning to leave office on January 20th?
I'm not looking at that, but I'll tell you, I have had more people ask me to have a third term, which is in a way a fourth term because the other election, the 2020 election was totally rigged. So it's actually sort of a fourth term in a certain way. I just don't want the credit for the second because Biden was so bad. He did such a bad job. And I think that's one of the reasons that I'm popular, if you want to know the truth. I think I'm popular because we've done a great job.
And so the president said, I'm not looking at that, even though he said he's not joking about pursuing a third term. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served 4 terms and died in office. And the 22nd Amendment limits a president's ability to do that. And any president, like President Trump, swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and to follow all the laws. There are ways to amend the Constitution. That takes an enormous effort and has not been done in a long time, sometimes decades of change before before there's an amendment. But the president also used that time in responding to the question to talk about the 2020 election, which again has been many times referred to through the courts, through even Republican advisors of his, as not having been fraudulent, even though he persists in saying that. So this is certainly a way to get people's attention. It is. We have certainly learned that you take Donald Trump's interests as serious until we learn otherwise, whether it's Canada as a 51st state or a possible extra term. So we're following this closely to learn what he's thinking about this, what mechanisms do exist to change those rules, and it's a space to watch. Chris?
Kelly O'Donnell, I know you'll do it for us. Thank you very much. Also in Washington today, Elon Musk is set to meet with CIA Director John Ratcliffe. NBC's Dan DeLuce is looking into that. Do we know why they're meeting?
Well, the director of the CIA, Chris, invited Elon Musk to come to CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia, to discuss government efficiency. That's about all we know, but of course we know that at other federal agencies, there have been major cuts, major attempts to shrink the workforce that have prompted a lot of criticism. And so the fear among some former intelligence officials and Democrats in Congress is that there may be arbitrary cuts in the offing for the intelligence agencies, the way they say there have been at other federal agencies. Now, the administration says they're going to take this carefully, that national security will be taken into account, but already there are employees who have been fired at CIA and some other intelligence agencies. These are newly hired employees in many cases, and also there were dozens fired because they worked on diversity jobs, which they were assigned to do under previous administrations, and they were fired because they were working on diversity, even though that was not their career specialty.
Dan DeLuce, thank you. Let's go to the Middle East now, where it was a deadly weekend.
Is going to essentially not have distance with Elon Musk, but essentially say that he is going to be an objective justice on the court, but still accepting anyone and any support that he can get. Now, it's a question here of how this is landing with the actual voters. We know that across the state, nearly 700,000 voters have already cast the ballot in an election that, by the way, is usually a pretty low turnout affair. It's a spring election in an off year. Listen to what some voters told our colleagues about how they're viewing this, specifically Musk and his role and his influence.
Well, he's buying it. He's trying to buy the election. He's trying to pay people to vote. It's illegal. He can't be doing it. It needs to be stopped. It's just a political move to try to advance his own agenda.
I think it's a great deal, even though he's getting dissed for all of this. But in essence, with Crawford, Soros, and Pritzker, and all those were in with their money way before Musk joined into this. So I think, all's fair in love and war.
It's clear that he's also at the top of minds for many of the voters going to the polls. But, Chris, there's also the substance here in this state. This election will determine ideological control of Wisconsin's Supreme Court. You'll remember that it was just 2 years ago that liberals won control of this court. That led to a Supreme Court that struck down state legislative maps. The point that you're hearing from Republicans, even national Republicans, is that they fear if the liberal justice or judge wins in this race, that could lead to congressional maps changing, which ultimately could determine the control of Congress when you look in Washington, D.C., Chris.
Shaquille Brewster, thank you. So, Congressman, as I think a lot of people know who watch this network, Wisconsin is a very purple state. It was the closest of the battlegrounds, went to Trump by less than 1%. But how much of this race do you think is going to be about Elon Musk and what's coming out of Washington, and how much about the people who are running?
Oh, I think it's a lot. Arguably, all politics are national right now, Chris, and you're seeing that with the explosion of Democratic activity in town halls across the country. Consider most Democrats are showing up saying, what can we do? How do we help? Where do we exert our energy? And so it comes down in many cases to special elections like this. And I would just point out on Elon Musk handing out $1 million checks. I mean, Republicans just 1 or 2 cycles ago were passing laws saying you're not allowed to hand out a bottle of water to somebody standing in line to vote. So it's a bit ridiculous what we're watching right now, and it should be illegal. But look, Democrats across the country right now, are going to town halls and they're asking, who's willing to fight for me? It's different than in the past where maybe they were fighting over are we progressive, are we moderate, who's left, who's right? That's not it. Democrats right now are trying to stand up to Trumpism, stand up to Elon Musk, stand up to the direction in Washington, and it makes for some very fertile ground in Wisconsin and in Florida special elections.
Actually, we know from recent polling that a majority of registered voters in Wisconsin have an unfavorable view of Elon Musk. What's more, a majority say he's not properly carrying out a Trump agenda. The Atlantic also reports that Musk's efforts may not only fail to cut overall spending, but could raise the deficit down the road. But I wonder, does this money and everything he's pumping into this outweigh all that? Or given how unpopular he and his ideas are, does he actually hurt more than help?
Well, for starters, we'll have to see the results. But him pumping all this money into it, what it does is, in many ways, it elevates him. And the two candidates actually running for the Wisconsin Supreme Court can get a little lost in the shuffle. And so then it becomes a question of, is it a good thing or a bad thing in certain ways to have this election be a referendum on Elon Musk? On the one hand, Elon Musk is not Donald Trump. He wasn't elected. He doesn't have the loyalty that Donald Trump commands. But the flip side is there's some people who have been saying that this could, Democrats usually come out more in power in off-year elections, special elections, by making this about Elon. It could juice the support of what we've seen can be a pretty potent MAGA base, but it's worth noting they're always at their most potent when it is Trump who himself is on the ballot, not someone else, not a surrogate, not an unelected tech oligarch.
Yeah, good point. All right, Congressman, switch. Go to your home state. Florida's 1st and 6th congressional districts, filling the seats left by Mike Waltz and Matt Gaetz. President Trump won that 1st district by 37 points. He won the 6th by 30. And yet, Republicans claim they're sweating a bit. What's your take on whether or not, first of all, these races have tightened, and if so, why?
Look, Chris, this will be fascinating to see the results. As Ashley said, we're going to have to wait to see what the numbers are. I think at a baseline expectation, Republicans and Democrats are expecting these races to tighten. But 30 points in politics is just sometimes too much to overcome. But what we are seeing is the participation of Democrats, the fundraising of the candidates. You're seeing Republicans worried. And why these are worried, I was first elected in a special election. And what happens is the national organizations and the national parties often come in and message test. And it may not be about the issues in the panhandle of Florida or in Daytona, Florida. It is about the sentiment of voters at large. And sometimes the candidates even get lost in those messages. But I would say, look, certainly either Democrat in Florida tonight or tomorrow night could pull off an upset. That's certainly in play. But I think you're going to see Republicans declare victory early. Democrats are going to be able to say we close the gap. Clearly, the momentum's on our side. What is fascinating is the amount of Democratic participation in giving and making calls and walking doors. That we are setting up for a major change election. Maybe it happens in Florida tomorrow night. But if not, I think Florida gives us a big indicator for the next 12 months.
Well, actually, the DNC chair, Ken Martin, told USA Today he expects to, and this is his quote, overperform expectations. When you have that big a gap, it may not be that hard to overperform double-digit expectations. But is a loss potentially still a win for Democrats, or is that a Democratic talking point?
Well, that's what I was going to say. Overperforming expectations doesn't necessarily mean winning the seat. The true win would be winning these two seats or one of these two seats, which people do not seem to expect. They seem to expect a tightening race. But I think if anyone was being honest, you want the actual win. A buzzer beater loss is still the same as a blowout. But I do think Democrats can and may take solace in this idea that special elections often, on the one hand, while they're not indicative of what will happen in the midterms or in national elections, they are a snapshot of voter sentiment. And it's a good way to see, about 3 months into the Trump administration, how do voters feel? Do they have any concerns that are contributing to the tightening of these races, in both of which are very clearly strong Republican districts.
You know this state so well, Congressman. What are you going to be watching for in particular? Give us kind of the insider conversation that will be happening at the DNC, at the campaigns and the like.
I think the Treasure Coast, which is the Daytona beaches, the East Coast beaches, that district first will be the first one to come in. Polls will close at 7, maybe results by about 7:50. The Panhandle race an hour later. What is interesting about the Treasure Coast race is the candidate there has raised, Democratic candidate has raised $10 or $12 million, which is remarkable. But the Republican is really not well liked, even among Republicans. And I think that's why people are really looking at that race, because the candidate in that race is not particularly strong. And the Panhandle, it's an old family of the Panhandle. It's a former statewide elected chief financial officer, and it's Matt Gaetz' old district with a 37-point spread. That one gets a lot harder, but the Democratic candidate is working it so hard and doing a great job. I think that Treasure Coast race, with reports in about 7:50 tomorrow evening, is going to be the one that everybody's watching.
Congressman David Jolly, Ashley Parker, thank you both. The guilty verdict setting off a political crisis in France. Far-right leader Marine Le Pen, the current frontrunner in France's 2027 presidential election, has just been barred from running for public office for 5 years. Le Pen was found guilty of embezzling close to $5 million from the European Parliament. She was spotted murmuring "incredible" as she was briskly taken out of the courtroom while the sentence was still being read. It included a 4-year prison sentence with 2 years suspended. Today, the Kremlin says it's working on scheduling another call between Presidents Trump and Putin after Trump exclusively told NBC News that he was very angry and pissed off at the Russian leader for comments made during the Ukraine ceasefire negotiations. But the president also told reporters on board Air Force One that he believes that ultimately a deal will get done. Air Force One that he believes that ultimately a deal will get done.
I was disappointed in a certain way, some of the things that were said over the last day or two having to do with Zelensky, because when he considers Zelensky not credible, he's supposed to be making a deal with him, whether you like him or you don't like him. So I wasn't happy with that. I don't think he's going to go back on his word. You're talking about Putin. I don't think he's going to go back on his word. I've known him for a long time. We've always gotten along well.
NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is in D.C., and I'm also joined by Ambassador Michael McFaul, former U.S. ambassador to Russia and an MSNBC international affairs analyst. Kelly, what exactly do we know about when a call might come and what the two men have to work out?
The latest we're hearing, which is based on reporting from our colleague Kristen Welker, who had a conversation with the president a couple of times this weekend, as well as the president's public statements to the press pool. We expect it will happen this week. Always these are considerations of timing and scheduling and when either side might feel there's the most advantage. And certainly what is notable about what President Trump is saying publicly now is there has been so much discussed about what could arguably be called some deference to Putin, some outreach and an attempt to bring him into a process for peace negotiations. And now the president has more of the stick approach, more critical of Vladimir Putin publicly. In part, I would think we could argue it's because the president's own credibility is on the line here. He has said he could get a peace deal done during the campaign season. He said he could do it in 24 hours. The reality of governance has stretched that out. He has engaged with Zelensky of Ukraine. He has engaged with Putin, and he has talked about a variety of inducements to try to get Putin to the table. Things like opening up markets again to Russia that were cut off because of its illegal invasion of Ukraine. So we will be waiting for a more definitive approach on when and what the president will say. We'll again look for how the readouts from the Kremlin versus the U.S. may give us some tea leaves about what went on there. But the president expressing some public frustration, even hostility toward Putin, is something that is in many ways novel for this president. He has said many times he's been very, very tough on Russia. And we're certainly seeing a moment where he is more harsh in his tone toward Putin than perhaps we've seen over the sweep of recent time.
So you've been in the room before, Ambassador. How does Vladimir Putin respond to a stick? When these two leaders go head to head, what do you think that looks like?
Well, first, it's one thing to threaten to use sticks. It's another to actually do it. And I think we need to be careful about that. President Trump, from time to time, has made threatening comments. And I think he's getting frustrated, and I would too if I were him, that his strategy of just giving concessions to Putin has not led to a ceasefire, let alone an end to the war. What Putin has done instead is he's taken those concessions and he's asked for more. And the president alluded to that. President Putin basically said, we need to have new elections in Ukraine before we can have a negotiation. And President Trump rightfully pushed back on that. But I think the next step is to actually do some of the things that he's threatened to do. Until he does that, Putin won't see these threats as credible.
Well, I mean, President Trump, among other things, is threatening tariffs on Russian oil. There are fears Putin could launch a fresh offensive to strengthen his negotiating position. So I wonder, from a tactical standpoint, who do you think might go into the meeting with an advantage?
Well, the advantage is to President Putin because he believes, and I fear rightfully so, that he cares more about this war than we do, that he is willing to wait us out, that we are not willing to give the Ukrainians more weapons. I think that is the crucial thing. It's one thing to threaten tariffs on Russian oil. Remember, we don't import a whole lot of Russian oil. And the idea that we're going to do secondary sanctions against the Chinese and the Indians, I find that highly unlikely. But what we really could do to get Putin's attention would be to provide more weapons to Ukraine. That would help to create a stalemate on the battlefield. And a stalemate on the battlefield is what I think is necessary for a lasting peace deal. That, to me, would show that that President Trump is credible about trying to negotiate an end to this war.
Obviously, all this being very closely watched, and Democratic Senator Michael Bennet had this reaction after Trump said he was angry with Putin.
This is crazy. I mean, Donald Trump, until this morning, has been saying that that Zelensky is not the real president of Ukraine. He's done nothing but undermine Ukraine's negotiating position, Europe's negotiating position, the unique negotiating position of the United States of America.
Is he right? I mean, does Trump's back and forth have only negative implications, or could it actually work to his advantage?
I have to say, so far, I think the senator's right, that all we've done is we've pressured the Ukrainians. We basically forced them to surrender. And all we've done so far is provide concessions, inducements to President Putin. And that strategy's not working. I think that's the important message here. And so, therefore, you have to change this strategy. And I think the right strategy for the president and his team would be to start pressuring Putin with sanctions, with weapons to Ukraine, to show that you're serious about putting pressure on both sides, not just one side, to do this deal.
Former Ambassador Michael McFaul, always good to have, to its lowest level since September, as investors brace for what President Trump calls Tariff Liberation Day on Wednesday. That's when he's promising to roll out his long-planned reciprocal tariffs on nations. On top of that, U.S. tariffs on foreign-made autos and auto parts will also go into effect. The president telling NBC's Kristen Welker he couldn't care less if foreign automakers raised prices on consumers. And Politico reports that even some of Trump's closest advisors are unsure exactly what he's planning to do with all these tariffs. I want to bring in Jake Sherman, co-founder of Punchbowl News and an MSNBC political contributor. Joining me here at the big board, NBC's Christine Romans. There's been so much talk, Christine, of tariffs. They've been levied, they've been pulled back. It's confusing for a lot of folks, but I know you've been tracking it all. So tell us what exactly is happening this week.
Threats and deadlines and pauses and retaliation. It has really been a storm of tariff talk. And just to tell you where we are, here's what is in effect. You've got tariffs against China, against steel and aluminum from the entire world, against Canada and Mexico on some auto parts, and then more Canadian and Mexican tariffs expected here. And then what we'll learn this week, that Liberation Day from foreign-made goods, that's what that's all about. You've got 12,500 tariff categories, 200 trading partners, the potential for just millions of new tariffs, or just a blanket tariff rate on everything. We just don't know what the president's going to decide with just days to go.
So, Jake, President Trump's senior trade advisor, Peter Navarro, claims that American consumers will benefit from the tariffs. I want to play that.
We're going to provide tax benefits, tax credits to the people who buy American cars. This is a genius thing that President Trump promised on the campaign trail. And in addition, the other tariffs are going to raise about $600 billion a year, about $6 trillion over a 10-year period. Consumers and Americans are going to be better off, including all the jobs they get.
It's a genius thing. Your Punchbowl News says Navarro's comments are going to dominate Capitol Hill conversations all week. So tell me what you're hearing so far, and if you're sensing any nervousness from Trump's allies on the Hill.
Massive nervousness.
Massive, okay.
How's that for a response? But let me talk about Navarro quickly. Two things that are important to keep in mind. Number one, the Trump administration has fallen into a habit of saying what it will do on taxes. It will provide a tax credit for American-made cars. It will waive tax payments for people making less than $150,000. The Trump administration can do nothing. The Trump administration can come to Congress and ask for Congress to put that into law. Otherwise, those are just made-up ideas. And they very well might on those two issues. I don't have much hope that either of those things are going to happen. That's number one. Number two, these numbers that Navarro is making up, or that he's stating about how much revenue these tariffs will bring in, are without evidence, right? We don't know. We have no idea where he's getting these numbers from. And this is the difficulty in policy making writ large, but also in policy making when you're in the huge minority in believing that this will be a successful short or long-term play, is that you're going to see, and we're seeing it now, equity markets slide because of these tariff fears, and they're making policy in a political world. So you have to wonder, and I wonder, and I hear it every day up here, whether Republican lawmakers are going to have the stomach to withstand their constituents harping at them over, their 401ks being cut by 20%. Because of these tariffs. And I've had people inside the administration and on the periphery of the administration and folks up here say, we don't know, we understand Trump's view on tariffs, but we don't know what we're asking for in return right now. This seems to be these aren't reciprocal right now. They're right now basically across the board 20% tariffs. So the White House is not doing, according to folks up here, a particularly good job at communicating what it's trying to achieve in the short, the medium, and long term, and what the White House and Congress will do to kind of bridge the gap and smooth things over for American businesses, American farms, and American consumers. And just one more thing here, and I'm sorry to dominate this, but Chris, if a company, the idea is to put manufacturing in this country. But if a company's stock is cut by 20%, consumers are spending less, are companies really going to be interested in investing in the United States when they're just trying to survive? That's another thing I've heard. So this will be a very interesting week when it comes to economic news, especially here on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, I'm also trying to figure out, Jake, and I think, we're past the point of necessarily being surprised by something that gets said by Donald Trump. But I'm trying to imagine a group of Republicans sitting around a table talking about messaging and thinking, the president saying he couldn't care less if those car prices go up is a great idea.
Well, in the totality of the quote was they'll buy American cars. But by the way, there are some American-made cars that still contain foreign components that wouldn't necessarily qualify. And I think Trump warned automakers not to raise prices in anticipation or in the wake of this. But we'll have to see if they heed that advice. And I can tell you, it is just clear as day, and we saw it in the last election. Consumers care, obviously, about the state of the economy, how much money they have, how much they can spend, and they hold the party in power responsible. And maybe the economy turns around, maybe the market's booming by 2026 and the economy's in the clear. But if it's not, this is a midterm election, the first midterm election in a president's cycle. Speaker Mike Johnson has said Republicans are going to increase the seats that they have in the House of Representatives. I don't know how that could happen if the economy, equity markets are tanking.
I was looking at the numbers this morning, Christine, and of course I can't remember it off the top of my head, but in addition to almost half of the cars that are purchased in the United States being foreign cars, more than half of American cars have foreign parts.
Yeah. The most American car I can find is 80% It's assembled in the U.S. and it's 80% of the product in it is American and 20% comes from someplace else.
So every single American car has foreign parts.
Right. You're going to see, yes, absolutely. And you're going to see higher costs for all those. Now, let me game this out for you because Jake is so right to think about it this way. If you have an exhausted consumer who is already worried about affordability for cars and car insurance, by the way, because car insurance will also go up if cars cost more, and cars get more expensive, people buy less. So the automakers do what? They make fewer cars and they actually are producing less. When they produce less, they lose a shift. Who loses first? The United Auto Workers, the workers who are putting those cars together because now you're making fewer cars. And so you have this situation where it can be the tariffs could be a chilling effect on the very thing that the president is trying to revive in the United States.
Jake, there's a new CBS poll out. 52% of Americans have a negative view of Trump's handling of the economy. 64% say he is not focused enough on lowering prices, something he said he would do on day one. 55% say he is focused too much on tariffs. Can the administration look at these numbers and think that Americans are willing to wait out how long it might take, even if the positive consequences he's promising happen?
That's the question. And that's why government tends to operate on short-term juice to the economy, short-term planning. The American voter doesn't really have a long-term view of the world, which is why our deficit and debts are, our deficit's our debt is $37 trillion, because people don't reward politicians who are going to make tough long-term choices. I think that these polls, that the right track, wrong track, approval, disapproval, are really just a momentary EKG. I don't put a lot of stock in them, to be honest with you. I think, listen, if the Republicans in the House and the Senate pass a huge tax cut bill and that gets popular, it'll flip the other way. So I don't put a ton of stock in those in the moment. But if you have 5 or 6 of those that are showing that people don't like the way the economy is being handled, they don't think he's lowered prices quickly enough, then that's a problem. And on top of that, I want to say one more thing here. It's very difficult on the campaign trail it's easy on the campaign trail, rather, to promise immediate action, immediate solutions for something. And then when you get into the White House and you get into power, it's a lot more difficult. There are a ton of reasons why goods are more expensive than they were, a year ago, 2 years ago, whatever the case may be. And it's not really immediately solvable all the time. But the president said on the campaign trail he was going to solve it. And now voters are going to wonder why he has not solved it when he said he would.
Jake Sherman.
Soldiers were all from the 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, which is based in Fort Stewart, Georgia. Chris.
Danielle Hamamdjian, thank you. More than 30 years after he made waves with his movie JFK, Oliver Stone is due to testify on Capitol Hill about the newly released files on JFK's assassination. He'll appear before the newly created Task Force on the Declassified